In the quiet suburbs of Maplewood Estates, life was supposed to be peaceful for a federal judge and his family. This judge, who we'll call Mr. Langston, had spent years ensuring justice in courtrooms across the country. At home, he just wanted a break from all the chaos of work, a place where rules were followed but not enforced with an iron fist. Unfortunately, that peace didn't last long. Maplewood Estates wasn't your typical suburban neighborhood. It was one of those places where every lawn had to look perfect. No cars could stay parked on the street overnight, and even the color of your curtains mattered if they were visible from outside. Most people there didn't mind these little rules because they added a sense of order. But then there was Karen. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her as HOA Karen, though not always fondly. She wasn't officially part of any government agency, but she acted like she ran the whole subdivision. Her job, or so she thought, was to make sure everyone obeyed the Homeowners Association guidelines, down to the tiniest detail. Karen's reputation preceded her. If someone painted their mailbox the wrong shade of white or left a toy stroller on the porch after sunset, she'd show up at their door faster than you could say, "Compliance." Some folks found her annoying but harmless. Others avoided eye contact whenever they saw her walking around with her clipboard and judgmental glare. What no one expected, however, was how far Karen would go to enforce what she considered her duty. One sunny afternoon, while Mr. Langston was away at work, his wife was upstairs putting their toddler down for a nap. The house was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional chirp of birds outside. That's when it happened. Unbeknownst to anyone inside, Karen decided this was the perfect time to conduct what she called a routine inspection of the property. Now here's the thing. Inspections weren't exactly routine in Maplewood Estates. They usually required notice, at least 48 hours, and explicit permission from the homeowner. But Karen operated by her own set of rules. She walked right up to the side door of the Langston's house, tested the handle, and discovered it unlocked. Without hesitation, she stepped inside. To Karen, this wasn't breaking in. It was simply doing her job. She figured that since she was inspecting for potential violations, knocking or asking permission would only slow things down. Besides, what harm could come from taking a quick peek? Inside, the living room looked immaculate. There were no piles of clutter, no shoes left out of place, nothing that remotely broke HOA rules. Still, Karen moved methodically, jotting notes on her clipboard. She checked under furniture, peeked into corners, and even glanced at framed photos on the walls. Everything seemed fine, but Karen believed that appearances could be deceiving. You never knew what kind of rule-breaking might be hiding behind closed doors. Upstairs, Mrs. Langston heard faint noises coming from downstairs. At first, she assumed it was the wind or maybe the dog moving around, even though they didn't have a dog. Curious, she tiptoed down the stairs, expecting to find nothing unusual. Instead, she froze at the sight before her. Karen standing in the middle of the living room, clipboard in hand, acting like she owned the place. "What are you doing here?" "Mrs." Langston blurted out, her voice trembling with shock and anger. "You can't just walk into someone's home." Karen barely looked up from her notes. "Oh, I'm just conducting an inspection," she said casually, as if barging into houses uninvited was completely normal. "It's my responsibility to ensure compliance with HOA guidelines." Mrs. Langston couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Compliance? Are you serious? You don't have the right to come in without permission." Karen shrugged, unfazed. "Well, technically, I do. As part of the HOA board, I'm allowed to check for violations, and besides, your door was open." That last comment hit a nerve. Open or not, no one should feel entitled to enter another person's private space without consent. Mrs. Langston tried to stay calm, but her frustration bubbled over. "Get out of my house," she demanded, pointing firmly toward the door. Now. For a moment, Karen hesitated. She clearly hadn't anticipated resistance. But instead of leaving immediately, she muttered something about filing a complaint and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Mrs. Langston stood there shaking, unsure whether to laugh or cry. How had such a simple afternoon turned into something so bizarre? When Mr. Langston returned home later that evening, his wife filled him in on everything that had happened. He listened quietly, his expression growing darker with each word. Anyone who knew him well understood that silence meant trouble brewing beneath the surface. A federal judge doesn't tolerate lawlessness, even when it comes disguised as neighborhood regulation. As he sat in his study that night, reviewing case files and sipping coffee, Mr. Langston couldn't shake off the absurdity of the situation. Here he was, someone who dedicated his life to upholding justice, dealing with a woman who thought she could rewrite the rules to suit herself. He realized this wasn't just about an unauthorized visit anymore. It was about principle, respect, boundaries, and teaching Karenin, perhaps, the entire neighborhood a lesson about accountability. Little did anyone know, this incident was only the beginning of a much bigger story. One that would test the limits of authority, challenge community dynamics, and ultimately reveal the true meaning of fairness, not just in courtrooms, but in everyday life. When Mr. Langston heard about what happened, his calm demeanor quickly turned into quiet fury. He wasn't the kind of person to lose his temper easily. Years as a federal judge had taught him how to stay composed even in the most heated situations. But this was different. It wasn't just about someone walking into his house uninvited. It was about respect, boundaries, and the law itself being disregarded by someone who thought she was above it all. That evening, after hearing his wife recount every detail, he sat silently at the dining table, staring at the wall. His mind was racing. Karen's actions weren't just rude, they were illegal. Trespassing wasn't something you brushed off, no matter how routine someone claimed their intentions were. And to think she did it under the guise of enforcing HOA rules made it even worse. Rules were meant to protect people, not invade their privacy or strip away their rights. Mrs. Langston watched him carefully, sensing the storm brewing inside him. She knew her husband well enough to know that when he got like this, something big was coming. "What are you thinking?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. He looked up, his jaw tight. "I'm thinking we need to handle this properly," he said firmly. "This isn't just about us anymore. If we let this slide, it sets a dangerous precedent for our neighborhood and for anyone else who has to deal with someone like her." The next morning, Mr. Langston called one of his closest friends, a lawyer named Michael Chen. They'd known each other for years, having worked together on several cases before. When Mr. Langston explained what happened, Michael didn't hesitate. "You're absolutely right," he said over the phone. "This is a clear violation of your rights. We can't let this go unanswered." Together, they came up with a plan. First, they drafted a formal letter addressed to the HOA board. In it, they outlined exactly what Karen had done, entering their home without permission, refusing to leave when asked, and attempting to justify her behavior using vague references to HOA policies. The letter demanded an apology not just from Karen but also from the HOA and warned of potential legal action if the matter wasn't resolved promptly. But Mr. Langston wasn't stopping there. He knew Karen wouldn't take this lying down. People like her thrived on drama and attention, often doubling down when confronted. So, he decided to make sure the entire neighborhood and maybe even the world knew exactly what had happened. After all, sunlight is the best disinfectant. With Michael's help, he filed a police report documenting the incident. This step wasn't just symbolic. It created an official record of Karen's actions. Whether or not charges would be pressed remained to be seen, but having that paperwork in place gave them leverage moving forward. More importantly, it sent a message. This wasn't some petty squabble between neighbors. It was a serious breach of trust and legality. As word began to spread through Maplewood Estates, reactions varied. Some residents were shocked. Others weren't surprised at all. Karen had always been controversial, stirring up trouble wherever she went. Still, many found it hard to believe she'd actually crossed such a blatant line. Entering someone's home without consent? That wasn't just overzealous, it was reckless. Meanwhile, Karen herself seemed oblivious to the growing backlash. Instead of laying low or apologizing, she doubled down. When questioned by a few curious neighbors, she dismissed the whole thing as ridiculous. "They're making a mountain out of a molehill," she told anyone who would listen. "All I did was check for compliance. It's my job." Her attitude only fueled more anger among those who already disliked her methods. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret, shook her head in disbelief. "It doesn't matter what her job is," she muttered to her daughter during a phone call. "You don't just walk into someone's house because you feel like it. That's common sense." For Mr. Langston, watching Karen dig herself deeper into denial was both infuriating and fascinating. He could see the parallels between her behavior and the kinds of defendants he often dealt with in court. People who refused to acknowledge their mistakes, convinced they were somehow exempt from accountability. Only this time the stakes were personal. As the days passed, Mr. Langston kept a close eye on Karen's movements around the neighborhood. He noticed how she continued patrolling the streets, clipboard in hand, acting like nothing had changed. Occasionally, she'd stop to chat with other homeowners, presumably trying to defend her actions. But instead of rallying support, her efforts backfired. Neighbors started avoiding her, whispering behind her back and exchanging knowing glances. Whenever she walked by, despite the growing tension, Mr. Langston remained patient. He understood that justice couldn't be rushed, especially when emotions ran high. For now, he focused on gathering evidence and building his case. Every email, every conversation, every interaction related to the incident was documented meticulously. He wanted to leave no room for doubt when the time came to confront Karen publicly. At the same time, he encouraged his wife to share her side of the story with trusted friends and neighbors. Word of mouth was powerful in small communities like Maplewood Estates, and he knew that first-hand accounts from someone who had experienced the intrusion directly would carry more weight than anything he could say. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch sipping lemonade, Mrs. Langston struck up a conversation with a young couple who lived across the street. They had recently moved into the neighborhood and hadn't yet formed strong opinions about Karen. As Mrs. Langston recounted the events leading up to Karen's unexpected visit, the couple listened intently, their expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. "I can't believe she just walked in like that," the husband said, shaking his head. "Doesn't she realize that's against the law?" "It's insane," Mrs. Langston replied. "And the worst part is, she doesn't seem to care. She thinks she's untouchable." Conversations like these became increasingly common throughout the neighborhood. Slowly but surely, public opinion began to turn against Karen. People who had once tolerated her antics now saw them in a new light. Her refusal to apologize or even acknowledge wrongdoing only reinforced the image of someone who believed she was above the rules. Mr. Langston observed all of this quietly, letting the tide shift naturally. He knew better than to push too hard or too fast. Sometimes, the best way to win a battle was to let your opponent trip over themselves. And based on Karen's current trajectory, it looked like she was heading straight for disaster. Still, he prepared for whatever might come next. Whether it was a confrontation at the next HOA meeting, a lawsuit, or something entirely unexpected, Mr. Langston was ready. He had spent years ensuring fairness and justice in courtrooms across the country. Now, it was time to bring that same commitment to his own backyard. The morning after the letter was sent to the HOA board, things in Maplewood Estates started to heat up. Word about Karen's break-in spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. The neighborhood wasn't particularly big on gossip most. People kept to themselves, but this story was too juicy to ignore. It had all the makings of a drama: an overzealous HO enforcer, a federal judge, and a brazen act that crossed every line imaginable. It began innocently enough. A few neighbors who had heard whispers about what happened decided to ask questions. One woman, a retired teacher named Linda, casually brought it up during her daily walk with her dog. "Did you hear about Karen?" she asked another neighbor, pushing a stroller. "Apparently she walked into someone's house without permission. Can you believe that?" The other neighbor gasped. "No way? Whose house?" Linda lowered her voice as if sharing a secret, though half the block could probably hear them anyway. "The Langstons, you know, the family with the little kid. And get this, the husband is a federal judge." By noon, the story had made its way through nearly every household in the subdivision. People talked about it while watering their lawns, waiting for their kids to come home from school, and even during their evening meals. Some were shocked, others amused, but everyone had an opinion. Karen, oblivious to the growing storm, went about her day as usual. She stopped by a few houses to remind owners about trimming their hedges or repainting their mailboxes. But instead of polite nods or quick apologies, she encountered icy stares and awkward silences. At one point, a man mowing his lawn paused mid-stroke, looked at her clipboard, and said dryly, "Just doing your job again, huh?" Before resuming his work without another word. Confused and slightly irritated, Karen tried brushing off the cold reception. "People will come around," she muttered to herself as she drove home. What she didn't realize was that the Langston side of the story was gaining traction, not just locally but online too. Mr. Langston, knowing how quickly rumors could spiral out of control, decided to take control of the narrative. Late that night, he posted screenshots of the police report and the formal letter sent to the HOA on a private Facebook group for Maplewood Estates residents. The post was anonymous, simply signed as a concerned neighbor. In it, he laid out the facts clearly and concisely. Karen had entered their home uninvited, refused to leave when asked, and justified her actions using vague references to HOA policies. He included photos of the unlocked door she claimed gave her permission to enter. Within hours, the post blew up. Comments poured in, ranging from outrage to disbelief. Some neighbors admitted they'd been intimidated by Karen in the past, but never spoke up because they feared retaliation. Others shared stories of similar run-ins, painting a picture of someone who took her role far too seriously and often abused it. One comment stood out among the rest. A single mom named Rachel wrote, "I always thought I was being paranoid, but now I see I wasn't alone. Last year, Karen came to my door demanding I remove a wind chime from my porch because it violated aesthetic guidelines. When I told her I liked it and wasn't taking it down, she threatened to fine me $500 a week until I complied. I ended up taking it down just to avoid the headache. Maybe it's time we put a stop to this nonsense." Rachel's words struck a chord with many residents. For years, they'd quietly endured Karen's antics, chalking them up to minor annoyances. But seeing her behavior laid bare and realizing how far she was willing to go made them reconsider their tolerance. By the end of the day, a group chat had formed among several homeowners, discussing ways to address the issue collectively. Meanwhile, Karen remained blissfully unaware of the backlash brewing against her. She spent the afternoon drafting a lengthy email to the HOA board, defending her actions and accusing the Langstons of exaggerating the situation. "They're trying to paint me as some kind of villain," she wrote, "but I was only doing what's best for the community. If we allow people to ignore the rules, where does it end? Next thing you know, everyone will be parking RVs in their driveways and letting their dogs roam free." Her email did little to sway public opinion. In fact, it only fueled more criticism. Someone leaked parts of it to the same Facebook group, prompting a fresh wave of comments mocking her tone-deaf response. One neighbor quipped, "Sounds like Karen thinks she's running a dictatorship, not a neighborhood." As the days passed, tensions reached a boiling point. A petition circulated calling for Karen's removal from the HOA board. Dozens of signatures piled up overnight, including those of longtime residents who had previously supported her efforts to keep the neighborhood tidy. Even the HOA president, a soft-spoken man named Tom, found himself fielding calls from angry members demanding answers. Tom called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. The turnout was unprecedented, with nearly every household represented. The room buzzed with tension as people waited for Karen to arrive. When she finally walked in, clipboard in hand and wearing her trademark no-nonsense expression, the atmosphere shifted. Conversation stopped and all eyes turned to her. Karen, sensing the hostility, launched into a defensive monologue before anyone could speak. "I understand there's been some misinformation spreading about recent events," she began, pacing back and forth. "Let me assure you, my intentions have always been pure. I'm here to protect the integrity of our community, and sometimes that means making tough decisions." Her speech was met with a mix of groans, eye rolls, and outright laughter. One man raised his hand and said, "Pure intentions? Walking into someone's house without permission isn't pure. It's illegal," Karen bristled. "That's not accurate. As part of the HOA board, I have certain responsibilities." "Responsibilities?" interrupted a woman sitting near the front. "You don't get to decide what's responsible. That's why we have laws you broke." The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. Karen glanced around, clearly flustered. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. Her usual confidence wavered as she realized the tide had turned decisively against her. Tom stepped forward, attempting to restore order. "Look, this has gone far enough," he said firmly. "We need to focus on finding a solution that works for everyone. That includes addressing concerns about enforcement practices and ensuring something like this doesn't happen again." But the damage was done. Karen's reputation, once untouchable, was crumbling before her eyes. Outside the meeting, neighbors continued discussing next steps. Some suggested revamping the HOA's inspection policies entirely, while others pushed for stricter oversight of board members. Whatever the outcome, it was clear that Karen's reign of micromanagement was coming to an end. For Mr. Langston, watching the fallout unfold was both satisfying and sobering. On one hand, he felt vindicated knowing that justice, or at least accountability, was finally catching up to Karen. On the other hand, he couldn't help but reflect on the broader implications of the situation. This wasn't just about one person's bad behavior. It was about power dynamics, unchecked authority, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. As he drove home that evening, he thought about the ripple effects of the past few days. The neighborhood had changed, perhaps irreversibly. Friendships might fray, alliances could shift, and trust would need to be rebuilt. Yet amidst the chaos, there was also hope. Hope that people would learn from this experience, that they'd remember the value of kindness, respect, and empathy. In their interactions with one another, little did he know the real showdown was still ahead. The court case looming on the horizon promised to bring even more drama and possibly closure. to this bizarre chapter in Maplewood Estates history. As the neighborhood buzzed with tension and whispers, Karen's refusal to back down only dug her deeper into trouble. Instead of apologizing or stepping aside quietly, she doubled down on her stance, insisting she had done nothing wrong. Her stubbornness set the stage for what would become a courtroom showdown that no one in Maplewood Estates could have predicted. The legal process began when Mr. Langston decided it was time to take things to the next level. Filing a civil lawsuit against Karen and the HOA wasn't just about seeking justice for himself and his family. It was about sending a message. People needed to understand that rules existed for everyone, even those who thought they were above them. With Michael Chun by his side, he prepared for a battle that would test not only Karen's actions, but also the very foundation of how the HOA operated. When the court date was announced, it became the talk of the town. Neighbors gathered at coffee shops, parks, and front porches, speculating about what might happen. Some saw it as a chance for closure. Others worried it would tear the community apart further. But one thing was certain. Everyone wanted to know how this story would end. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Residents of Maplewood Estates filled the benches, eager to witness firsthand what promised to be a dramatic confrontation. Reporters from local newspapers and TV stations showed up too, drawn by the unusual nature of the case, a federal judge suing an HOA enforcer over a trespassing incident. It was the kind of human drama that rarely made headlines but captured the public's imagination nonetheless. Karen arrived looking defiant, clutching a folder stuffed with papers. She wore a professional outfit, clearly trying to project authority and confidence. But beneath her polished exterior, there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. This wasn't her usual territory. She thrived on controlling small details, not defending herself under cross-examination. As she took her seat, she glanced around nervously, perhaps realizing for the first time just how much attention this case had attracted. Mr. Langston, on the other hand, exuded calm. He sat beside his attorney, listening intently as opening statements began. When it was his turn to testify, he rose slowly, adjusting his tie before approaching the stand. The courtroom fell silent as he recounted the events leading up to Karen's intrusion. His voice was steady, measured, and carried the weight of someone who had spent decades ensuring fairness in courtrooms across the country. "I'm a federal judge," he began, looking directly at the jury. "Every day, I work to uphold the law and protect people's rights. When I come home, I expect to find peace, not someone walking into my house without permission. What happened here wasn't just a violation of privacy. It was a disregard for basic human decency and respect." His words resonated deeply, not just with the jury, but with everyone in the room. Even some of Karen's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They couldn't deny the logic behind what he was saying. No matter how strict the HOA guidelines were, they didn't give anyone the right to barge into someone else's home. Karen's testimony, however, painted a stark contrast. When called to the stand, she spoke confidently at first, reiterating her belief that she was just doing her job. She described her role in the HOA as a sacred duty, emphasizing her commitment to maintaining order in the neighborhood. But as the questioning continued, cracks began to show. Michael Chun, known for his sharp wit and relentless pursuit of truth, took charge during cross-examination. "Miss Karen," he began, leaning casually on the podium, "you mentioned earlier that you believed entering the Langstons' home was within your rights. Can you explain why you felt that way?" Karen hesitated, glancing at her lawyer before responding. "Well, as part of the HOA board, I'm responsible for ensuring compliance with our guidelines. Their door was unlocked, so I assumed." "You assumed?" Chun interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Let me clarify something for the record. Just because a door is unlocked doesn't mean you're invited inside. Did you knock? Did you ask? For permission? No, Karen admitted reluctantly, her confidence wavering. But I thought isn't enough, Sean cut in, his tone firm yet composed. The law requires consent. You didn't have it, correct? Karen nodded reluctantly, her face growing red. The courtroom murmured in agreement, sensing the tide turning against her. Sean pressed on, presenting evidence that painted Karen in an increasingly unfavorable light. Videos surfaced showing her berating neighbors over minor infractions, emails revealing her threats of fines, and witness testimonies describing similar incidents where she had pushed boundaries. Each piece of evidence chipped away at her credibility, exposing her behavior as more than just overzealous. It was obsessive and often cruel. One particularly damning moment came when Rachel, the single mom who had shared her wind chime story online, took the stand. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted how Karen had bullied her into removing the decoration she loved. She said she'd fine me $500 a week until I complied, Rachel explained. I couldn't afford that, so I gave in, but it made me feel powerless, like I didn't have a say in my own home. The jury listened intently, visibly moved by her account. Other witnesses followed, sharing their own experiences of intimidation and frustration. By the time the defense rested its case, Karen's image as a well-meaning enforcer had crumbled completely. She now appeared as someone obsessed with control, willing to trample over others' rights to satisfy her own sense of order. Throughout the trial, Mr. Langston remained composed, letting the evidence speak for itself. He knew better than to let emotions cloud his judgment. He'd seen too many cases fall apart because of theatrics. Still, there was a quiet satisfaction in watching the truth unfold, knowing that justice was finally being served. By the final day of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Everyone leaned forward in anticipation as the judge delivered his instructions to the jury. After a tense deliberation period, the verdict came back. Karen was found liable for trespassing and ordered to pay substantial damages to the Langstons. Additionally, the court imposed new restrictions on the HOA's inspection policies, requiring explicit written consent from homeowners before any entry onto their property. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the decision sank in. For Karen, it was a humiliating defeat. She sat motionless, staring blankly ahead as reporters snapped photos and scribbled notes. Outside, news outlets broadcast the verdict live, turning the local dispute into a national conversation about homeowners' rights versus HOA overreach. Back in Maplewood Estates, reactions were mixed but largely positive. Many residents felt vindicated, seeing the ruling as a victory for common sense and fairness. Others expressed relief that the ordeal was finally over, though they knew repairing the damage to the community's trust would take time. For Mr. Langston, the outcome was bittersweet. While he was glad to see justice prevail, he hoped the experience would serve as a lesson not just for Karen, but for everyone. Communities thrived when built on mutual respect, understanding, and empathy. Power, whether wielded by judges, HOA members, or ordinary citizens, came with responsibility. And accountability, no matter how uncomfortable, was essential for keeping that power in check. As he walked out of the courthouse that day, surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers, Mr. Langston allowed himself a small smile. The fight had been long and exhausting, but it was worth it. Justice, after all, wasn't just about winning, it was about setting things right. The courtroom verdict was a turning point, not just for Karen, but for the entire neighborhood. As the news spread through Maplewood Estates, it felt like a collective sigh of relief washed over the community. People who had once tiptoed around Karen's rules now walked taller, exchanging smiles and nods with neighbors they hadn't spoken to in years. The ruling wasn't just about one person being held accountable. It was about reclaiming a sense of balance and fairness that had been missing for far too long. Karen didn't stick around after the trial. Humiliated and stripped of her authority, she quietly resigned from the HOA board within days. No formal announcement was made, just a short email sent to members saying she needed to focus on personal matters. Some speculated she was embarrassed to show her face in public, while others thought she might have realized how much damage her actions had caused. Either way, her absence left a void, but not the kind anyone minded filling. In the weeks that followed, the HOA underwent significant changes. A new president was elected, someone more approachable and less rigid than Tom, the previous leader. Residents came together to rewrite the association's policies, ensuring they were clear, fair, and respectful of individual rights. Gone were the nitpicky rules about mailbox colors or wind chimes. Instead, the focus shifted to maintaining safety, cleanliness, and harmony without infringing on people's freedom to live as they chose. One of the biggest changes came in the form of regular town hall meetings. These gatherings gave everyone a chance to voice concerns, share ideas, and work collaboratively toward solutions. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a true community again. People started hosting block parties, organizing weekend cleanups, and even setting up a shared garden where kids could learn about planting and growing vegetables. It was almost as if the tension Karen had stirred up had been holding everyone back, and now, finally, they were free to move forward. For Mr. Langston and his family, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible after such an ordeal. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance began stopping by to introduce themselves, bringing cookies or offering help with yard work. One afternoon, a group of children knocked on their door, presenting a handmade card that read, "Thank you for standing up for us." Signed by nearly every household in the subdivision, it was a gesture that brought tears to Mrs. Langston's eyes. Despite the newfound goodwill, Mr. Langston remained reflective. He knew that the legal victory and Karen's downfall weren't ends in themselves, they were opportunities for growth. During one of the town hall meetings, he stood up to address the crowd, his tone warm but firm. "This isn't just about what happened to my family," he said, looking around the room. "It's about learning from it. We all have a responsibility to treat each other with kindness and respect. Rules are important, yes, but they should protect us, not divide us." His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations that continued long after the meeting ended. People began checking in on one another more often, offering support during tough times and celebrating milestones together. Friendships blossomed between families who had lived next door to each other for years, but never truly connected. Even small acts of kindness like shoveling snow off a neighbor's driveway or leaving fresh produce on their porch became commonplace. As for Karen, she faded into obscurity. Rumor had it she moved to another state, though no one bothered to verify the details. Her name occasionally came up in conversation, usually accompanied by laughter or disbelief. "Remember when she tried to fine me for having a bird bath?" One neighbor joked during a barbecue. "Good riddance, I say." But not everyone laughed. Some residents, particularly those who had once supported Karen, took the opportunity to reflect on their own behavior. They admitted they'd stayed silent for too long, afraid of rocking the boat or becoming targets themselves. Now they vowed to speak up whenever they saw injustice, knowing firsthand how powerful collective action could be. Months later, as autumn leaves blanketed the streets of Maplewood Estates, the neighborhood looked different, not physically, but in spirit. Homes still adhered to basic guidelines, but there was a looseness, a warmth that hadn't existed before. Front yards displayed quirky decorations, from scarecrows to string lights, adding personality to the once uniform landscape. Kids played freely outside, their laughter echoing through the crisp air. And at the center of it all stood the Langstons' house, its windows glowing warmly as the family gathered inside for dinner. Mr. Langston often found himself sitting on the porch after work, watching the world go by. Sometimes neighbors would join him, sharing stories or simply enjoying the quiet companionship. On one such evening, a young couple approached hesitantly, their toddler clinging to his mother's leg. "We just wanted to thank you," the husband sighed, shifting uncomfortably. "If it weren't for you, we probably wouldn't feel so comfortable here. This place feels safe now," Mr. Langston smiled, waving off the praise. "It wasn't just me," he replied. "Everyone played a part. Communities are strongest when we stand together." The couple nodded, smiling gratefully before heading home. As Mr. Langston watched them walk away, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The fight had been worth it not because of the court case or the headlines, but because it reminded people of something fundamental, that justice, fairness, and respect weren't abstract concepts reserved for courtrooms. They were principles meant to guide everyday life. Life in Maplewood Estates wasn't perfect. It never would be. Disagreements still arose, and occasional tensions flared. But the difference now was that people talked things out instead of letting resentment fester. They remembered the lessons learned from the chaos Karen had unleashed, that unchecked power corrupts, that silence can enable wrongdoing, and that standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, is always worth it. And so, the neighborhood moved forward, stronger and more united than ever. The shadow of Karen's intrusion lingered, but only as a reminder of how far they'd come. For Mr. Langston, the experience reinforced everything he believed in, that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoers, but about fostering understanding, empathy, and accountability. As he leaned back in his chair, sipping a cup of coffee and listening to the distant hum of laughter, he allowed himself a moment of peace. The battle had been fought, the scars were healing, and the future looked brighter than ever. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just served, it was shared.